It's only been a week and a half since Tim Walz has been announced as Kamala's running mate. But to be honest, it feels like a really, really, really long time, months maybe, because of all the stories we've been hearing about that guy. And sometimes I wonder, and I'm concerned that we're hearing too many
Too
stories too
much.
soon because they're just so bad. Um, we put out an article here on the stolen valor part of it, so we can talk a bit about that. We can talk a bit about these other stories surrounding him as well. And I guess we should talk about the politics of it. Yes, of course, the stories in and of themselves are bad in their own ways, and we can go through that. But ultimately, this is politics. So ultimately, is it a good idea to hammer this guy so hard now? Or should we really wait until after the Democratic National Convention when he's sort of locked in, and then might be the right time to hit him harder?
Yeah, and it's an interesting point because people are very very riled up right now, and like you said, maybe that's good, but maybe we let that simmer for a little bit. It's interesting. I just have you ever seen two more shallow, empty candidates ever? Kamala is a nothing. She can't talk. She can't even talk for 90 seconds with a reporter. And Waltz, I mean, what is that? He's like a disco queen candidate or something who's just kind of wants to flounce out onto stage, and yet it appears that he's got all kinds of baggage trailing after him, and almost as if he was just unvetted. And of course, the stolen valor is the one that's kind of preeminent. And
Yeah, it is. So, yeah, why don't we just jump in with that one and kind of just quickly have a look at that and what it's about and what the media has tried to make it. Now, I remember the night when, or the day when he was announced, it didn't take 2 milliseconds for the stolen valor to come out on
yeah,
Twitter. So obviously this was a known issue. And then I went and looked around, and within the Minnesota press, this has been an issue for since 2005, 6, around that time. You can find articles on exactly this issue. So Kamala knew, right?
well, the thing that I keep having a little bit of a struggle wrapping my head around, and I think I probably know the answer, is that, as I understand it, Eric Holder was in charge of vetting this guy.
He was, yes.
And so if Holder knew, Kamala knew, or, well, let's say it differently. If Holder knew, Obama knew, in terms of kind of the power structure of the DNC. I would assume that Kamala knew. And but if Eric Holder knew about these problems, why did he let that go ahead? I think that's kind of an interesting question into itself. It may be that Kamala was so quick to kind of secure her side of the coup, because really what we almost experienced was like two different coups that took place. First was the DNC coup of getting Biden out. And then we don't have all the details, but it almost feels like there was a secondary coup where Kamala jumped in, seized the moment, and cemented her position, which may not have been at the wishes of DNC leadership. That kind of remains to be seen. So through that kind of morass, we suddenly end up with Waltz, who, fundamentally, he actually was vetted, but it didn't seem to matter in terms of making their decision. And now we've got all, as you said, the stolen valor allegations, began almost immediately.
And ironically, they began with her own campaign website or campaign Twitter site that put out this video to coincide with his announcement. And even more ironically, I mean, this story has so many ironies within. The video they put out had initially been posted by a guy called David Hogg, who is a Democrat activist. Now, he came out of the school shooting and all that. We don't want to, kind of demean any of that, but he's become this big Democrat activist. So he put out this video a few weeks back. Obviously, he was a Waltz fan, or he was trying to promote Waltz or whatever. Anyway, in that video, Waltz talks about the weapons that he carried in war. This is very important, in war. Now, Hogg, anti-gun and so on, fine. Okay, that's his thing. But then the Kamala campaign, a few weeks after that, when they actually announced Waltz, took that video and put it on their own site and copied that line about Waltz talking, and they put it in the actual tweet as well. So you don't only listen to it, you can even see it written out where it says that Waltz carried these weapons in war. This is him speaking. So that was the sort of the hook. That's how it all started. And it started, as you say, like immediately on the day he was announced. Well, this guy never went to any combat theater. So what's he talking about? And then they tried to clean that up by saying, no, he misspoke, the usual thing. And then the media, by that point, that was like 2 or 3 days later. But by that point, the media had already, it was obviously singing this guy's praises, best ever, everything, Kamala, best ever, Walz, best ever, or whatever. And in the meantime, on Twitter, there were other issues to do with stolen valor, which we can get into here in a moment, that were starting to unfold. But the media completely ignored those other issues and were like, oh, look, the campaign has cleaned it up. He just misspoke. That's it. Okay. The problem there's three issues in total. At least 3 that we know about. Now, the one where he says he carried weapons in war. Yes, he said that on video, and yes, maybe he misspoke, maybe he didn't misspeak, but it seems like he didn't misspeak, because on that issue, we have so many other clips of him being introduced as an Afghanistan veteran and so on and so forth, and he never once says no, I didn't go, or whatever. He just in a C-SPAN video, when he's introduced as an Afghanistan veteran, he kind of just nods along, yeah. So we've got a lot of that, but it's not just the in-war thing. There's other issues as well. There's the deployment, bailing out of the deployment. So his unit got an advance warning that they were going to get deployed into Iraq. And this was in 2005. And within a few weeks of that, he retired, like, I'm out of here. And so a lot of people are upset about that as well. And then the third issue is rank, where he calls himself a command sergeant major, which he never achieved. So there's really at least three separate issues. And what kind of, by the time that the Kamala campaign tried to clean up the first issue, the media knew about all these other issues, but they just said, oh no, it's being dealt with. You remember when JD Vance was on CNN and he brought up some of this stuff? Mm-hmm. The CNN stenographer said, no, it's been dealt with. The campaign has already clarified that.
That's one of the reasons. The fact you started off with talking about the video that was put up, where the Kamala campaign put that up. That is part of the reason why I wonder about the vetting and whether the vetting was communicated to the Kamala campaign. If Eric Holder had told you can't get Walz because he's got all these issues and here are the primary ones, you're not going to post that video. At least I don't see why you would. Maybe you're that dumb, but I have a hard time seeing that. So that's kind of what got me wondering about that whole scenario and what's going on behind the scenes. As far as that being this pretense that it's an isolated incident, of course it's not. You've already, illustrated in a number of ones. One of the things, I went over to his old website, former Representative Tim Walz, and he's still got his fictitious rank up on his site. And of course further videos have just surfaced time and again, just repeatedly. And one of the things he always seemed to be doing was sometimes he'd be overt about it. I carried weapons in Iraq, etc. Other times he allows the other party to ascribe valor to him, which he then assumes. He effectively validates them. He doesn't correct them. It just allows that false praise to be kind of heaped on him. And maybe this is a good time to note, this is something that it's infuriating to us, but I can't imagine what it's like for the people that actually served. And, I kind of don't want to underplay that, because there's this, I don't think we can fully appreciate how truly angering this is to members of the service who've gone through and have been these places, who haven't, stolen valor. That just is such a big deal. And you and I are upset about this, but think about how these people feel, the people that served honorably in our military and portrayed their service honorably. I can't imagine how enraged they are.
I think that's the part that the Kamala campaign, again, I agree with you. We don't know the exact circumstances of how this guy was chosen and how this came about and how they missed or didn't miss all these issues. But they must have known something. I don't think Holder was able to just kind of pull the wool over their eyes just like that. It was just because it came out so immediately and there were so many stories immediately. I cannot believe that no one in the Kamala campaign knew about this stuff. And I mean, so my take is that they just didn't think it was a big issue, precisely because of what you just said. This is stuff that upsets people, but you just move on, and the news cycle is so fast these days, and people will just forget, and next week we'll talk about something else, which is pretty much, Trump was shot like a month ago, and it's as if that was like, oh, maybe years ago. That's how it feels because of how the news cycle works. So I assume they kind of thought it was going to be one of those, but they totally underestimated exactly what you said. The people who did serve, and especially the people who did serve in combat zones, and imagine the people in that unit, some of whom died, who went to Iraq back in 2006. The unit that Walz, retired
out
from.
on as the
How must they feel, right? And there's another video which, again, I can vicariously feel for these people and how bad it must be. But as you say, we weren't there, so we can only imagine how bad they must feel. Walz spoke in front of a Gold Star family this many years ago. And again, he put up this pretense that he had gone to either Afghanistan or Iraq. I don't think it was clear which one, because he was just kind of talking in these generalities which seems to be his modus operandi, where he pretends that he went without actually ever kind of spelling it out in as many words. But this was in front of a Gold Star family, and the reason why it's especially grating is because he talked about post-traumatic stress disorder. That when we came back, we were offered, counseling for PTSD and so on. Well, where did you come back from, and why would you need that? He didn't. He had one deployment, or shall we call it trip to Italy, and that was it. So you're absolutely right, and I think whatever. I mean, without getting into the details because we don't know exactly how this went down and why this guy was chosen. I don't think they have any idea what's coming, because this issue has now been here every single day. It's been pounded hard, maybe luckily not too hard, because, as we said at the outset here, pounding it too hard might mean that Democrats might swap this guy out. And by the way, if they do swap him out, then we're back into this quick news cycle thing. Imagine they swap him out next week. No one's ever going to remember who Tim Walz was by September, October, or whatever. The focus will be on the new guy. So they have a chance to swap him out, and kind of my hope is that they don't.
Yeah, it's really, I don't think it can be undersold how the news cycle has changed. And, the idea, maybe it seems a little silly to think the idea that Tim Walz could be knocked out and it won't be harming to the campaign and that people will just move on. But that's exactly what's happened with every single thing that's transpired. It amazes me that the guy that allowed the Minnesota riots to go on, that allowed Minnesota to burn, demonstrably so, whose wife said that she kept the doors open to smell the burning tires of the riots, that this is the same guy that people are cheering. But that just plays to what we're talking about how this news cycle just goes forward. And it's all about this creation of just these fictional candidates. I don't know about you, but in my mind, Walz is maybe even more, if it's possible, even more fabricated than Kamala. And I say that because he's portraying himself to be diametrically the opposite of what he actually is. Although, of course, so is Kamala. She's a Marxist at heart. But he's this folksy guy who's there for the people and et cetera, et cetera. He's a Marxist. He allowed the riots to transpire. He's an habitual liar. He's the opposite of this happy kind of, I don't know, dancing, sort of embracing the crowds. I love everybody. Let's just mind your own business, despite the fact that I established a snitch line for Minnesotans to, rat on their neighbors during COVID. His front-facing portrayal is the exact opposite of who he is, and it's so deeply galling.
We haven't even talked about all his other issues, and again, I'm kind of hoping we don't, or not too much before the convention, because that's when they lock him in. Now, just to digress here for a moment, there was a guy who was locked in at the convention back in 1972 called Thomas Eagleton on the Democrat side, and he was removed or replaced shortly after the convention. So I'm not talking about whether it's legally, technically possible or whatever. I'm just talking more in terms of what's feasible. And I think before the convention is still feasible, and the news cycle will kind of just eat this up and it will be gone. After the convention is not feasible.
Different
and
story.
By the way, in 1972, Democrats lost in the biggest electoral landslide in history to this day. And that includes Reagan and everyone else. That's how bad it was back in 1972. So replacing this guy after the convention, not going to happen. So let's just wait until after the convention. And then other story. I mean, I agree with you. The stolen valor is going to be the worst. And that's the one that's been kind of just going. It's not going away. There are millions of military families. They feel this far more than we do. And
yes,
we feel it. And this isn't going away. And then we start looking at these other issues as well. I mean, China is a huge one. This guy has been in China, I don't know how many times, supposedly to teach. Okay, that's maybe very honorable and great and whatever, but there's just a little problem with that. If you go to China and say the wrong thing, if you go and teach there and you talk about things that matter, transparency and democracy, rule of law and whatever, I guarantee you're not going to be going back there next year to teach. It's not going to happen, right?
Yeah.
The fact that he kept going back at a minimum tells us that he only said what he was allowed to say. So does that mean he shouldn't go to China? I don't know. We'll find out. But we've seen some evidence already that when Trump was going hard against China during Trump's first term, this guy was out there saying, no, don't do that. And these are just friends of ours. They're just, the usual shtick about this is just an economic competitor. There's like all good and so on. At a minimum, he totally misreads China. That's the most generous case. Far more likely, this guy, as you say, is at heart some kind of Marxist who endorses their stuff, or maybe it's somewhere in the middle where he just sucks up to them because that's something else that he seems to be quite good at. So we have that. Then there's the whole coaching thing. I haven't looked at, to be honest, I have not looked into details of that, but it's been like, it's been thrown out there that he calls himself coach, and the Kamala campaign even printed these signs of coach, coach, coach. And then it turns out he wasn't even coach. He was some assistant or whatever. So there's going to be a lot more other than the stolen valor, even though I completely agree with you. The stolen valor is going to be the one, and that's the main one why we want him to stick around.
Well, first of all, I don't even know where to start, so I'll be careful. He's just one of those guys that when I look at him, I know there's something wrong, but that's a separate issue. That's not provable at this point. What has been done is two guys that have been doing a lot of work on this. The China aspect is something that really is deserving of more attention. And the two guys that have been doing a lot of work on this are Peter Schweizer and a guy that he works closely with, who I know both of them a little bit, and that's Seamus Brunner. And, Brunner put out something where he noted that Walz has been to China more than 30 times. And as he noted, with the CCP in place and exactly what you're saying, you're not doing that for the food and for the climate. There's a reason that you're going back there. And when you're in as part of an exchange program, well, if you're doing it as part of an exchange program, what you're really doing it with is as part of a program with the Chinese Communist Party government. Those things are not separable. And when you're bringing over counterparts to study here, those people are not separable from the Chinese Communist Party. So, I think this is something that's going to get a lot more attention. To have two guys like Schweizer and Seamus on this, who know the Chinese side of it intimately, as do you, and know the corruption side of it, I have a feeling that there's an awful lot more coming because I know both of those guys are working on it. But just the 30 trips alone, right there, that should be raising all kinds of warning signs.
It certainly should. And I'm sure we'll get around to all those things so long as they hold on to this guy, which brings us to the convention here. So I think if it follows the normal order, I haven't seen a definitive schedule yet. I can see that he'll obviously talk, and Kamala will obviously talk, Obama will talk, and the Clintons will talk. They'll all give their speeches. Now, if it follows the normal order of things, I think it will be August 21st when this guy Walz gives his acceptance speech. And I think after that speech is the time to kind of fire the starting gun on this guy. Now, the starting gun has been fired, but I think it's just going to, if say the Trump campaign has has been anticipating and preparing this, on the morning of the 22nd, you will see a huge rollout of all this stuff concerning this guy. And that's how it ought to be. You got to play this smart. You don't want to do what happened with Biden, right? You debate him too early, and then he's gone because you want to keep him around.
Yeah. There's, Seamus actually had just retweeted somebody, and the tweet that he retweeted was, "They are just scratching the surface of the Walz corruption and lies. The Minnesota press has covered for this guy for so long that they probably believe the lies by now. Walz and his fellow Dems have turned Minnesota into a cesspool." And I think that tweet is accurate. And like you said, it's a matter of the rollout. And the fact that we haven't pushed too hard on these other items yet gives me hope that that's exactly what they're trying to do, is allow this to go in. I mean, I know you feel so strongly about it that you sat down and pumped out that article where, making the case. And it's a great one to be made, is let's keep the heat up, but let's keep things at a simmer right now, and let's let this guy get slotted in and then bring the full force to bear. And it kind of feels like that's what's happening, but it's a little tippy. So, I hope that maybe in the near term it dies down a little bit.
I think it's been okay. I mean, you do need to keep it up.
You don't want to not talk about it.
Exactly. If it had just been the first few days and then no one ever talked about it again, that wouldn't be good either.
No.
You need to keep it it needs to simmer. That's very important. But it's also important. I mean, Don Jr. has kind of, I think, overshot the target a bit already a few times by really laying into this guy in various ways. But okay, he's junior. He's not dad, and I guess that's okay. But simmering is fine. But then when the day comes, when he's locked in, that's when you really go from. And I think maybe one last point here that's really, really important and different from all these previous races is because Kamala is so vacuous, and because people, they've now been told that actually she's not vacuous at all. She's just this,
she's a cultural icon, haven't you heard?
The smartest ever and whatever. I think deep down people still at some level understand that maybe they don't understand she's vacuous, but at least they understand she has no executive experience. She has very little experience with anything, frankly.
She's not Biden.
Right. With Biden, I mean, look, he was senile and he was nasty and he did all these nasty things, but at least he could point to like 50 years of stuff, and people might be led to the impression that he knows what he's doing, or he's been around for a long time, whatever. You could just make stuff up. But with her, it's very difficult to make stuff up, even though they're trying. I think what will still be left with her, as much as they try, is that she's largely untested and inexperienced. I mean, that's going to be extremely hard to overcome. At least at some emotional level, people will not associate her with a long a record of experience. And this is where it's different from previous vice presidential picks, because in previous years, in pretty much every single race you could look at, the top of the ticket had it stood on their own. They had their own gravitas. They had their own, Donald Trump was a very successful businessman. Hillary Clinton has been in or around power for 30 years. She was Secretary of State. She was in the White House for 8 years, kind of semi-running things. I mean, like them or not, everyone had their kind of story, which was at least in some way tied to some experience, and she doesn't. Therefore, I think a lot more people will pay attention to the second in charge, the second person there. And I think it would have actually been good for her to choose someone who, George W. Bush did something similar in 2000 when he chose Dick Cheney, the experienced guy, the guy who was there for Iraq War I and so on. Someone who was a bit of a chaperone, not super obvious, but a little bit, and it didn't harm him, right? I think she might have done that. He's 60, or he's 59. I don't even think he's 60. He looks like much, much, much older. But I think that was part of the calculus. Like, we'll have this chaperone-looking guy who's kind of this experienced guy here, military and whatever, and you take him apart, and it reflects really, really badly on her. Anyway, to make a long story short, I think it's far more damaging to the Kamala campaign to go after Walz, or will be, than with any previous campaign going after any previous vice presidential contender.
I agree completely. I think you put it very, very well that, Kamala is by definition a hollow candidate. We've never had somebody who's achieved the height of power that she has with nothing to show for it, nothing under her belt. A failed prosecutor in California, somebody who shifts with whatever political wins, has basically been hidden by the Biden administration for the last 3.5 years precisely because she was utterly incompetent. And, now they put forth Walz, and I don't think it's any mistake that Walz has been almost kind of stealing the limelight a little bit, that he's out there and he's overly exuberant and kind of embracing all that for some of the reasons that you talked about. So I actually think what you just raised is a very, very important point, that the idea of him being pulled out. Well, go ahead.
Have you, with J.D. Vance, I didn't know that much about him, but I've been finding him extremely impressive. The thing that I find most impressive about him is that he's able to articulate Trump policies better than Trump can. He's just very, very good at explaining stuff. And have you noticed how they put him out there and he talks to the media every day? He does interviews every day, and he's doing exactly that. He's articulating Trump policies, and Trump doesn't, that takes that pressure away from Trump. Trump doesn't have to do that because he's got the, and I think they probably plan to do something similar with this Walz guy, that Kamala can just kind of sit back, no interviews, because it would be terrible. Yeah. Eventually she'll probably have to do one or few, but give her a lot of time, many, many weeks to not do it, and have this Walz guy out there doing it. But now they can't put him out either because he's going to get asked about stolen valor. So now they ended up in a situation where neither of them can do interviews. Isn't it fantastic?
Yeah, and there is very real pressure mounted on Kamala. We finally saw it for the first time, where it was a CNN reporter was basically grilling a member of the Kamala campaign and saying, hey, she's got a clear day. Is she going to talk to the media today? And the campaign person immediately started moving into her forward calendar. Oh, well, she's got all these things. And he stops. He goes, wait, but she has nothing on the calendar today. Is she going to be doing an interview? And there was this moment of panic. So, hopefully maybe that mounts up because, as you said, they've kind of gotten the Kamala campaign has kind of gotten themselves into this deep catch-22.